If you're listening to this, please, don't skip ahead. I know I'm just an old woman talking from a creaky wooden chair, but I promise you, this story isn't about pity. It's about the truth. My truth. And maybe it'll touch someone out there who still believes silence means peace. Because sometimes, silence is where the pain hides best. My name is Margaret Louise Bennett, though most folks just called me Maggie. I was born in 1940 in a small town outside Topeka, Kansas, back when radio was the heart of the house and the smell of wheat and dust clung to your clothes like second skin. My mama was gentle, quiet, the kind of woman who spoke more with her eyes than her mouth. But my daddy, Lord help me, my daddy had a presence that filled every room. He was a man who believed in order. And in our house, that meant his way or no way. He was the town's postmaster, proud of it too, always in a crisp shirt, sleeves rolled up, talking about reputation and discipline. And to the world, he was charming, polite smiles, firm handshakes. But behind closed doors, he was different. You could hear the tension in the way he chewed his supper, in how his boots hit the floor when he didn't like something Mama said. So if you're watching, my friend, go ahead and like this video, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's story. 'Cause this ain't just my story, it's the story of too many women who had to smile through the silence. The piano came into my life when I was 7. A second-hand upright Mama bought from a church sale. She said I had music in my fingertips. I remember the first time I pressed those yellowed keys. The sound bloomed in that tiny living room like sunlight. I didn't know then that it'd be both my salvation and my curse. By the time I turned 10, Daddy decided I was his little prodigy. He'd make me play for every guest, every church potluck, every Sunday gathering. "Play that Chopin piece, Maggie," he'd say, standing behind me with his hand on my shoulder, heavy and possessive. "Make 'em proud they know Bennett." And I did. I played till my fingers burned. Till the keys blurred with tears I never let fall. Because when I played well, he'd beam. But when I missed a note, just one wrong note, his smile would vanish. "You call that music?" he'd say. "You think anyone'll remember a girl who can't even keep tempo?" He'd grab the metronome and slam it on the piano. Tick, tick, tick. Again, again, again. I was 11 when he stopped calling me Maggie. Started calling me my investment. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. He didn't love my music. He loved what it made him look like. The postmaster with the gifted daughter. The man who tamed the sound itself. Sometimes Mama would sneak in at night and whisper, "You don't have to play, sweetheart. Not tonight." But Daddy always found out. And then, the shouting. The breaking dishes. Mama crying in the pantry while I sat on the piano bench, staring at the keys, wondering how something so beautiful could cause so much hurt. By 14, I'd won a regional contest in Topeka. Daddy was there, of course, smiling for the cameras, shaking hands with the judges. But that night, when we got home, he told me, "You looked nervous. That's Maggie's weakness, Maggie. People smell weakness. Don't you ever let them see you sweat." He said it like advice. But his tone made my stomach twist. You see, when you grow up with someone like that, love and fear get all tangled up. You don't know where one ends and the other begins. Sometimes, I still hear him. Even now. That slow, disappointed sigh. That voice that said, "You'll never be enough unless I say you are." I practiced until my wrists ached. Until I started hearing music in my sleep. I'd close my eyes and the keys would still move beneath my fingers in dreams. And yet, it was never enough. When I turned 16, a scout from Wichita came to hear me play. Daddy said it was my chance to be somebody. I remember that day clearer than any other. The smell of polish on the piano, the sunlight slanting through the curtains, Mama standing in the doorway wringing her hands. I played my heart out. Beethoven's Sonata No. 8. I still remember the feeling, like my whole soul was breaking open. But then I saw Daddy's reflection in the mirror behind the piano. His face. That flat, unyielding stare. I hit one wrong chord. Just one. And when it was over, he didn't clap. He didn't say a word till the scout left. Then he turned to me and said, "You embarrassed me." That's all. Just that. That night, I heard Mama pleading in the hallway. "She's a child, Harold. She's your child." And he said, "She's an instrument. And I'm the one keeping her in tune." That was the night I stopped being a daughter. I became his performance. If you've ever loved something so deeply that it starts to hurt, you'll understand. That was me and the piano. I couldn't quit. Because without it, I was nothing. But with it, I was trapped. Years later, when I became Margaret Bennett, the Kansas virtuoso, the papers wrote about my talent, my discipline, my grace. They didn't write about the girl who bled inside every time she touched the keys. I know this is heavy, but if you're still listening, please, click that little heart, leave a comment. Not for me. For every young girl who was told her worth depended on how perfectly she performed. Because behind every perfect note, there's a story no one wants to hear. And that story, mine, doesn't end with applause. It ends with silence. A silence so deep it took decades to understand. But I'll tell you how it happened. How I lost not just my hearing, but my will to live. And how, by some strange miracle, it was a young deaf student who reminded me of music. Doesn't have to be heard to be felt. You're still here. Thank you. It means more than you know. You see, talking about the pain is one thing, but being heard? That's something I stopped believing in a long time ago. If you're watching this, go ahead and like the video, not for me, but for every girl who's ever been told she owed her father her dreams. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. The night the music died. I was 19. The year was 1959. Elvis was on the radio, gasoline was 25 cents a gallon, and my name had just been printed in the Topeka Herald, Margaret Bennett, Kansas young piano prodigy. My father cut the clipping out, framed it, and hung it right in the living room. You'd have thought he'd built the piano himself, the way he strutted when people mentioned it. But with every headline, every applause, I could feel the leash tightening. He managed my schedule, my performances, my interviews. He spoke for me, as though I was an instrument that didn't have a mouth. "She's grateful," he'd say to reporters. "She owes it all to her training." And by training, he meant him. People called him supportive. I called him suffocating. Mama barely spoke by then. She'd become a shadow moving between the stove and the laundry line, her eyes distant, her voice paper-thin. Sometimes, when Daddy wasn't home, she'd hum a tune I didn't recognize. A slow, sorrowful melody. I once asked her what song it was. "It's one your grandmother used to sing when she was sad," she whispered. She said it could make flowers bloom even after frost. Back then, I didn't understand the weight of that. I do now. When I got accepted into a conservatory in Chicago, my heart nearly burst. I was going to leave Kansas, finally breathe, finally play for myself. But Daddy said no. He said Chicago was full of temptations. That girls who leave home forget their values. He told me if I went, I'd be cut off. No home. No support. No father. I remember crying in my room, clutching the acceptance letter, the ink smudged with tears. Mama came in, sat beside me, and brushed my hair back like she used to when I was little. "Sometimes love," she whispered, "isn't about staying. It's about surviving." I didn't understand then that she was telling me to go anyway. But I stayed. Because that's what fear does. It cages you with guilt and calls it loyalty. The night it all changed was a stormy Friday in late September. I had a recital at the First Methodist Church in Topeka, fundraiser for the town's new library. The whole place smelled of rain and old wood. Daddy stood in the front row, arms crossed, face carved in stone. I played Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor, my favorite piece. The one that always felt like a prayer whispered through the fingers. The crowd swayed with every note. I saw tears in the front row. But not from him. When I finished, people stood. They clapped, whistled, shouted, "Bravo!" But Daddy didn't move. On the ride home, the air in the truck was heavy. The wipers beat like a metronome. "You lingered too long in the adagio," he said flatly. "I was feeling the emotion of the piece," I replied. "Emotion?" He snorted. "Emotion doesn't win scholarships. Precision does." That's when something broke in me. I said quietly, "You don't love my music. You love controlling it." The truck swerved slightly. He didn't answer. Just clenched the wheel tighter. When we pulled into the driveway, the storm was raging. Thunder cracked so loud it shook the windows. I tried to get out, but he grabbed my wrist. Hard. "You listen to me, Margaret. Without me, you are nothing. You'll end up like your mother, mumbling songs no one cares to hear." I yanked my hand free and ran inside. My heart was pounding so loud it drowned out the rain. Mama was standing by the kitchen sink, frozen, clutching a dish towel. "Go to bed," she said softly. "Please." But I didn't. I went to the parlor, the old upright piano gleaming in the dim light. I sat down, furious, shaking, and I played. Loud. Wild. Not Chopin. Not Beethoven. Just chaos. Every note that had ever been trapped in me came flooding out. I didn't hear the front door slam. Didn't see him storm back in. He shouted my name, but I kept playing. Then I felt it. His hand on my shoulder. Then, crash. He slammed the piano lid down. Hard. It caught my fingers. I screamed. The pain was blinding. He shouted something, words I can't repeat, but I remember the look in his eyes. Not rage. Disgust. Mama screamed, grabbed my arm, pulled me away. "You'll kill her, Harold," she cried. He backed away, chest heaving, face pale. I ran outside barefoot, bleeding, sobbing into the storm. The rain felt cold and endless. And somewhere between the thunder and my screams, lightning struck, so close it lit the whole yard white. The next thing I remember was silent. When I woke up in the hospital, my hands were bandaged. My ears were ringing. Everything sounded like it was underwater. The doctor said the lightning must have struck a transformer nearby, sent a surge that rattled the nerves in my ears. "Partial hearing loss," he said. "Maybe temporary. Maybe not." Daddy never came. Mama did. She sat beside me, holding my hand, her eyes swollen from crying. "You didn't deserve this," she whispered. But I knew she'd go home to him anyway. Because that's what we both did. We stayed. When I was released, the piano sat untouched for weeks. The keys were stained where my blood had dried. I couldn't bring myself to clean it. Couldn't even look at it. Every sound felt distorted. Tinny. Far away. Music was my whole world, and now it sounded like ghosts whispering through broken glass. And my father. He told the neighbors I'd had a little accident. Said it was God's way of humbling me. That was the last straw. One night, Mama packed a suitcase for me. Quietly. Just a few dresses, a little money she'd saved from her sewing work. "You can't stay here, Margaret," she said. "Go. While you still have something left." I hugged her so tight I thought my ribs might crack. She smelled like lavender and starch. I didn't want to let go. But I did. I left that night, with a wrapped bundle of sheet music under my arm, and the Kansas wind howling like an old friend warning me not to look back. I took a bus to Wichita, then another to Denver. Slept in stations. Played piano in diners for coins. But the sound, it wasn't right anymore. Every note felt wrong, off pitch, as if the world had moved half a beat without me. By the time I reached Chicago, ironically, the city I'd once been forbidden to go to, my hearing had faded more. The doctors said it was permanent now. Nerve damage, they called it. I remember staring at the piano keys under those harsh hospital lights, thinking, what good are fingers that can't feel music anymore? That was the day I stopped playing. And for nearly 30 years, I never touched another piano. Soft pause. So, if you've listened this far, thank you. And please, leave a comment. Tell me if you've ever lost something you thought you could never live without. Because that's what this story is about. Loss. And what comes after. But it isn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Because, decades later, long after my hair turned grey and my hands stiffened with age, someone walked into my life. A young girl. Deaf from birth. And she showed me that you don't have to hear music to understand its soul. If you're still here, bless your heart. I didn't think anyone would listen this long. It's hard enough for most folks to stay with a story once it stops being shiny. But pain has a strange way of softening with age, like fabric worn thin. You start to see the truth through it. If you haven't already, go ahead and like this video, will you? Not for me, but for every soul who's ever thought their life ended the day their purpose disappeared. Because mine sure did. After I left Kansas, life became quieter in more ways than one. I settled in Chicago in the early 60s, working as a typist at a legal office near Dearborn. My hearing faded year by year, till all I could make out were muffled vibrations and low hums. Conversations became shapes on people's lips. Music, my lifelong companion, became something I could only remember, not experience. For decades, I lived like a ghost. I married a kind man named Robert, a Vietnam vet who taught woodshop at a community college. He was patient, good with his hands, and never asked too many questions about my past. We never had children. I think deep down, I was too afraid. Afraid I'd turn into my father, afraid I'd pass down his shadow instead of my light. Robert passed away in 1998. Heart failure. One moment he was sanding a chair in the garage, the next, he was gone. After that, I moved to a small apartment on the south side. My world shrank to a few rooms, a couch, a pot of tea, and the same four walls. Every day was just another version of silence. Sometimes I'd dream of the piano. Not the notes, just the feeling. My fingers gliding across ivory, the faint tremor of life that used to pulse through me when I played. But every time I woke, that feeling vanished like smoke. I thought I'd made peace with it. Until the day she walked in. It was a Tuesday morning in 2004. I'd been volunteering part-time at a community center for the deaf. Mostly clerical work, filing lesson materials, translating basic notes on a typewriter. I never told them I used to be a pianist. It felt like a different life, one that belonged to someone braver. Then she showed up, a teenager, maybe 16, brown hair in two messy braids, freckles across her nose. Her name was Lila. She came in with her mother, clutching a spiral notebook. Her eyes were bright, not the kind of brightness that comes from youth, but the kind that comes from defiance. Her mother signed to me, "Lila wants to learn music." I froze. I typed back, "She's deaf." Her mother nodded. "Born that way." I wanted to laugh. Not out of cruelty, but disbelief. How could someone who'd never heard a sound want to play music? But Lila just smiled at me, like she already knew what I was thinking. She took out her notebook and scribbled, "I want to feel what others hear." That one sentence broke something open in me. I tried to decline. Told them I wasn't a teacher. That my hearing was nearly gone, my hands stiff, my piano long sold to pay medical bills years ago. But Lila's mother just said, "We'll bring our own keyboard. Just give her an hour." So I did. And that hour changed everything. We started meeting twice a week. At first, she'd place her hands on the keyboard, timid, hesitant. I'd show her how to press the keys, how to let her wrists float, how to breathe through the music. Then, one day, I placed her palms on the top of the keyboard while I played a simple chord progression. She closed her eyes, tilted her head slightly, and smiled. She was feeling it. She could sense the vibrations through her skin, the same way I once felt the pulse of life through my fingertips when I played as a girl. It was like watching a mirror reflect a part of myself I thought had died. From that day on, we didn't talk about notes or scales. We talked about emotion. How does this chord make you feel? I'd type on a notepad. She'd write back. Warm. Like sunlight through glass. What about this one? She'd frown, then scribble. Cold. Like rain on a metal roof. She was describing music in colors, in sensations, in texture. Things most hearing people never even notice. And me. I started hearing again. Not with my ears, but with my heart. One afternoon, after weeks of lessons, she surprised me. She rolled on her small keyboard, set it on the table and signed, "Your turn." I shook my head. "No," I signed back. "I don't play anymore." She looked straight at me, stubborn as a Kansas mule, and tapped her chest twice, the sign for feeling. "Feel," she repeated. So I did. I sat down. My fingers hovered above the keys like they were hovering above an old wound. My hands trembled. But when I pressed that first note, low, soft, trembling, I felt something I hadn't felt in 40 years. A vibration. Deep. Steady. Alive. Tears blurred my vision. My body remembered what my mind had forgotten. Lila laughed. No sound, just this wide, joyful grin. She placed her hands next to mine on the keyboard, and together, we played something neither of us could fully hear, but both could feel. It was magic. Not the kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind. The kind that heals instead of dazzles. Over the next year, Lila grew into a remarkable player. She couldn't hear the notes, but she understood rhythm through breath and heartbeat. We'd tap patterns on the table, count through vibration, and sometimes, I'd lay a small wooden block on the piano so she could rest her fingertips on it and sense the resonance. Every time she played, I saw a piece of my younger self, that little girl from Kansas who just wanted to make something beautiful before the world broke it. And slowly, the silence in me began to fade. I started keeping a small notebook of melodies again. Not sheet music. Just memories. I'd write things like, the sound of rain on the tin roof. Mama's lullaby that never had a name. The way Lila's hands glow when she finds the right chord. That notebook became my new music. One day, after a lesson, Lila handed me a letter. I'll never forget her handwriting. Big, looping letters like a child's, but strong. "You taught me that music isn't something you hear," it said. "It's something you live. Thank you for helping me listen with my soul." I cried for the first time in years. Not the quiet kind, either, the shaking, body-deep kind. Because in teaching her how to feel music, she taught me how to forgive myself. Forgive the father who couldn't love me the way I needed. Forgive the silence that had once felt like punishment. Forgive the years I'd spent afraid to touch the keys. You know, people ask me sometimes if I miss hearing music. I tell them, no. Because now, I am music. Every time I feel my heartbeat. Every time the wind rattles the window pane or the kettle hums on the stove. Every time I see someone's face light up when they understand something for the first time, that's a melody to me now. And if you've stayed this long, thank you. Truly. If you know someone who's lost their spark, share this with them. Tell them silence isn't the end. It's just the pause before a new song begins. Because the truth is, the girl I once was, she didn't die in that storm. She was just waiting for someone brave enough to remind her what it felt like to play again. And that someone was a deaf girl named Lila. You're still here with me, aren't you, sweetheart? Thank you. It's strange, isn't it, how after all these years, the silence became my only true companion. But if you've listened to me this far, then you deserve to hear the rest. The hardest part, and maybe the most beautiful part too. When I lost my hearing, I thought God had closed the last door to whatever was left of my soul. It wasn't just about music. It was about purpose. For 50 years, every rhythm, every heartbeat, Every decision I made was measured against the tempo of a piano. Without sound, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. You might think I'm exaggerating, but let me tell you, silence can scream louder than any argument. I could still feel music sometimes, through the vibration of the keys. I'd place my palm flat against the lid and imagine the notes trembling beneath my skin like trapped butterflies. But that's all they were, phantoms of a life that no longer belonged to me. My husband passed away in '99. Cancer. Quick but cruel. My children, 2 boys, had long grown up and moved far away, into cities that spoke a language of progress and busyness I never could learn. They'd call on birthdays, send flowers on Mother's Day. But between those gestures, I lived quietly in the old farmhouse in Kansas, where my piano stood like an abandoned altar. I stopped teaching, stopped performing, stopped living. My world shrank to the soft shuffle of my slippers on the hardwood, the tick of the clock I couldn't hear, the hum of a refrigerator that I only imagined. Until one day, about 10 years ago, I got a knock on my door. It was early spring. The wheat fields were gold at their edges, and the air smelled of rain that hadn't yet come. I remember because I felt it, the heaviness of the sky pressing down like a held breath. When I opened the door, a young woman stood there. Dark hair, gentle eyes. She was holding the hand of a small boy, 8 or 9, maybe. He had sandy brown hair and an open, curious face. The woman spoke, but I didn't hear her words. I read her lips. "You're Mrs. Hayes, right? The pianist." I hesitated. That name, Pianist, it felt like a cruel joke. Like someone was calling me by a title that belonged to another lifetime. I nodded, out of politeness more than pride. She signed something to the boy, and his hands fluttered like small birds. Then she said, "This is my son, Daniel. He's deaf. He wants to learn piano, to feel it." I almost laughed. Feel it. What could a deaf boy learn from a woman who couldn't even hear the ghosts of her own music anymore? But there was something in his eyes, something I hadn't seen in my own reflection for years. Hunger. Not for fame, or applause, or perfection, but for connection. So I agreed. The first lesson was awkward. I tried explaining rhythm, pressure, emotion, using gestures, drawings, vibrations. He didn't seem to understand much, but he smiled. And every time he placed his hands on the keys, his eyes widened. He didn't hear the notes, but he felt them in his bones. And slowly, I began to remember something. When I was a little girl, before the fear, before the manipulation, before my father's cruelty carved silence into my spirit, I used to press my ear against the piano. I wanted to feel the sound, not just hear it. That's what Daniel was doing. Not playing notes, but listening with his soul. Week after week, he came back. Rain or shine, he'd sit by that same old piano with the chipped ivory keys. And you know what, dear? He never looked sad about his silence. To him, silence wasn't a loss, it was a language. One afternoon, while he was practicing, something inside me broke open. His little hands were playing a song I had written decades ago, before my hearing faded, before my marriage, before my father's death. I hadn't shown him that piece. Somehow, he'd found the sheet among the stacks and tried to mimic it by watching my old recordings his mother found online. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the tears on my hands. I hadn't cried like that since the day I left home. And then I did something I hadn't done in decades. I sat beside him and played. We played together, in perfect silence. The vibrations trembled up my arms, through my chest, into my throat. My bones sang, even if my ears didn't. When we finished, Daniel smiled up at me, signing, "You can still hear, just differently." That moment, my dear listener, it changed everything. I started teaching again, not for money, not for reputation, but for meaning. Daniel was my first deaf student, but he wasn't my last. Over the years, I taught others like him, children and adults who lived in the quiet but refused to be silenced. They taught me that hearing isn't just with your ears. It's with your heart, your fingertips, your memories. The silence I once cursed became my greatest teacher. Sometimes, I still dream of my father. In those dreams, he's sitting by the piano, telling me how worthless I am, how I'll never be enough. But now, I look him in the eye and say nothing. I just play. My music doesn't need his permission anymore. I don't hate him. Not anymore. Hate is just another chain. I've spent too long in cages of sound and silence. Now I want peace. And I've found it, at last, in the quiet. If you're still watching this video, thank you for listening to my story. I know it's long and painful in parts, but I needed to tell it. Sometimes we hold on to pain so tightly, it becomes our only melody. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You can lose everything, your family, your fame, your hearing, your faith, and still find your way back to music. Because music isn't just what you hear, it's what you feel. If you've ever lost something precious and thought it was the end, I hope my story reminds you, it's never too late to begin again. The silence doesn't mean the song is over. It just means you're listening differently now. So if my words touched you, my dear, go ahead and like this video. Leave me a comment. I read them all, even if I can't hear them. And subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine. You know, it's taken me 79 years to tell this story out loud. I used to think silence was my punishment. Now I see, it was my cocoon. For most of my life, I buried the sound of what happened deep inside me, like an old melody I didn't dare to hum. I thought if I stayed quiet, the pain would forget me. But pain has its own rhythm. It hums beneath your ribs, patient as winter, waiting for the courage of spring. And tonight, sitting here with the last light on my face, the piano sleeping behind me, I finally understand. I wasn't meant to forget. I was meant to transform. What I lost wasn't just hearing. It was trust, innocence, a girl's belief that love always sounds sweet. But what I found, after all the silence, after all the breaking, is a truth I want you to remember. Even silence can sing. You just have to learn to listen differently. So if you're watching this, my dear, and you've survived something unspeakable, please know, you are not broken. You are simply becoming. The cracks in your heart aren't signs of failure, they're the openings where light slips in, where a new song begins to take shape. Tell your story when you're ready. Whisper it, write it, paint it, whatever makes the ache breathe again. Because every story told becomes a lantern for someone still wandering in the dark. As for me, my name is Eleanor Hayes. But maybe tonight, I'll sign off as the woman I've been becoming all along, Ellie Grace. Grace, not the kind that erases the pain, but the kind that lets it rest. If my story touched you, give this video a like. Leave a comment if you've ever found beauty in your own silence. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, of women who broke but didn't disappear, then please, subscribe. This isn't goodbye, sweetheart. It's just the soft closing of a piano lid after the last note fades. The song is over, but the echo is still alive. And so am I.